Alright, so here's my discussion for tonight. Hidden secret in your food. Any guesses? What is it? What do you think I'm going to talk about?
Probably all the unnatural chemicals.
Unnatural chemicals? That's absolutely part of it.
Preservatives.
GMOs. GMOs, genetically modified and genetically engineered food. Not only crop, but now getting into animals. Salmon, chicken, things like this, where they're changing the genetics of foods. Genetic engineering. Genetically engineered food comes from crops, mostly, that have been altered by mixing and matching genes, usually from genetically modified organisms. Researchers take genes from one species and force them into another species, even between species that have never made it in nature. Think that's a problem? You know, when you start doing stuff like that, mixing and matching to make what they think is a higher, not necessarily quality product, but it can produce more food is what it does, or more produce, more output.
More money.
More money. So that's exactly right. It is all about the money. So there's two types of genetically engineered, genetically modified organisms. As far as crops goes, one of them is this herbicide-tolerant crops, which are plants engineered to withstand heavy herbicides spraying without sustaining damage. So they can put a whole bunch of chemicals on them to kill the unwanted weeds and things like this, but it's not going to damage the crop that they're trying to grow. And there's pesticide-producing crops. So these are plants that are engineered to produce their own pesticides. So if a bug bites one, its stomach explodes and dies. Exactly. Why wouldn't any common sense person ask that question? What is that doing to my stomach? If it's doing it to the bug, what's it doing to me?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Genetic engineering. So the process of genetic engineering is highly imprecise and riddled with unintended consequences because of this differentiate species, everything that they're doing to change the genome of these pieces of organic substance. Viruses are typically used to genetically engineer the genes in a new species. So they're using viruses as well to make these mutations happen in RNA, DNA, the genetic makeup of these crops. Inserting the gene and then cloning it can trigger massive collateral damage, sometimes hundreds to thousands of genetic mutations down the line. So mutations, when you think about that word, that's not a good word, mutations. Anything you have, every time you have something mutating, that means it's changing into something that's not good. The end result is a gene sequence that doesn't exist anywhere else in nature. They're getting this stuff so altered away from its normal state. Obviously, it existed nowhere else in nature and never ever before. What could possibly go wrong, right? I mean, what's the problem here? Estimates are up to 85% of our corn grown in the U.S. is genetically engineered. 85% of the corn grown now is genetically engineered. It's a big, big money thing. Monsanto, Pioneer DuPont, you know, these companies are monster, and they got their hands into a lot of different things. You know, they're the beginning of the food chain for big food, and they're into government, and they're into a lot of different deals. So here we go. This is going to be a little short movie for us, and then we'll talk more. Make sure my volume is good enough for you guys to hear. If not, I might have to grab a speaker.
Genetically modified organisms, GMOs, pose unparalleled threats. Nothing like them has ever existed in the entire course of life on this planet.
The campaign of ignorance that is currently being waged by the FDA is so insidious that the FDA actively opposes the honest labeling of genetically modified foods.
Every single independent study conducted on the impact of genetically modified food shows that it damages organs, it causes infertility, it causes immune system failure. It causes holes in the GI tract. It causes multiple organ system failure when it's eaten. It causes a variety of changes, some of which we can't even guess at, as new proteins are coded for by the altered DNA that we've never seen before. We are playing with genetic fire.
Genetic engineering is a process where scientists take genes from one species and force it into the DNA of other species. Even though there's been very little study on the health dangers, there's been sufficient evidence of harm to cause the American Academy of Environmental Medicine to say all doctors should prescribe non-GMO diets to everyone. They say that the animal feeding studies link GMOs to reproductive problems, immune system problems, accelerated aging, organ damage, gastrointestinal distress, dysfunctional regulation of cholesterol and insulin, to name a few.
These genetic systems, just in the last 5 years, have been shown that all higher plants and animals are far, far more complex than ever was believed. And so it turns out that in the splicing process, that mutations occur and can cause immune system problems. And this has been the biggest problem and has been shown a number of times.
An immune response is a reaction to something that's foreign that the body doesn't recognize and tries to push out. By definition, genetically modified foods have something foreign. When genetically modified soybeans were fed to rodents, we've seen changes in the testicles changing from pink to blue, changes in the sperm cells, changes in the uterus and ovaries, in the DNA functioning of the embryo offspring. We've seen smaller babies, a death rate that's 5 times that compared to controls. Sterile babies, even babies with hair growing in their mouths. And this has been done by government scientists as well as independent scientists who are at the top of their field.
American people are beginning to become more aware and wake up to the fact that their government has been corrupted by corporations and the food that they're feeding themselves has possibly serious human health risks.
The 1992 policy of the FDA claims that the government is aware of any information showing that GMOs are significant. On the basis of that sentence, they said no testing was necessary, no labeling was necessary, and companies like Monsanto, that makes most of the genetically modified food products, they can determine if their genetically modified foods are safe. The most common reason why they genetically engineer crops is so that they don't die when sprayed with herbicide.
No genetically modified crop can grow unless it's attached to some kind of a pesticide. Those pesticides, more and more, are in these plants. They may have killed the weeds, they may have killed the insects, but the product is still on the plants, and it is washed off, that is in the water, it gets into the lakes, it gets into the oceans, it's everywhere. And it's toxic, it causes cancer, it also causes endocrine disruption. That's a technical term, the change of hormones. They don't even want to label that this is genetically modified. The milk is genetically modified, or the crop is genetically modified. They say, if we label that, we won't be able to sell it because people won't buy it. Of course, people won't buy it because people don't want it.
The reason why we have 170 million acres of genetically engineered corn and soybeans and cotton and canola oil and sugar beets in the United States is because it doesn't have to be labeled. In the European Union, where labeling is required, there's almost no genetically engineered food on store shelves, in restaurants. There's almost none of it planted.
Today, more than 50 countries around the world allow labeling of genetically engineered foods.
The FDA came out with its infamous policy stating that genetically engineered foods are substantially equivalent to non-genetically engineered foods. The person in charge of labeling policy at that time was Michael Taylor, who had previously worked as an attorney and lobbyist for Monsanto. After Taylor left the FDA in the early 90s, he went back to to Monsanto and then came back to the FDA.
The FDA has argued at Codex meetings that the average consumer is too ignorant to recognize the difference between a GMO labeled food and a non-GMO labeled food they make their own choice. And that's their stated reason for opposing GMO labeling.
UN Food Safety Standards Setting Organization, it's jointly run by the World Health Organization and the Food and Agriculture Organization. That's called Codex Alimentarius. There was an 8-year process where all the countries in the world came together and talked about whether there should be safety assessments for genetically engineered crops, genetically engineered animals, and genetically engineered microorganisms. We went to all these meetings over 8 years. There's now global agreement that there should be required safety testing for these crops before they come on the market. And you know what? The U.S. does not require that.
It's the FDA and the USDA who helped lead the charge for these new food safety bills. There's nothing in those bills to protect you. It's there to protect the genetic engineering industry. And unfortunately, if we don't stop this, you won't see organic farmers. The rules in the bills currently are so strict, so arbitrary, that if you are a small organic farmer, you can't meet the requirements for safety. As a result, you'll go out of business.
As the chemical seed package has spread, and now with genetically engineered seed that originally was free in India because it belonged to the farmers, or was low cost because it was released from the public sector universities that did seed breeding. In the genetic engineering revolution, these seeds are now patented property of one corporation called Monsanto. Cotton seed used to cost 5 rupees, 7 rupees a kilogram. When Monsanto entered with this BT cotton, it shot the price up to 3,600 rupees a kilogram for seed.
The U.S. government was forced to spend $3 to $5 billion per year to prop up the prices of the GM crops that no one else wanted. The White House decided to fast-track biotechnology because they thought it would increase U.S. exports and U.S. domination of the food supply. But the opposite happened. And so the U.S. government was forced to spend $3 to $5 billion per year to prop up the prices of the GM crops that no one else wanted. So instead of admitting that they were a failure and withdrawing them, they've been trying to push open the markets, bullying other countries. George Bush filed a lawsuit essentially with the World Trade Organization against Europe, saying that their rejection of genetically modified foods was an illegal trade barrier. We know from WikiLeaks that the entire State Department apparatus has been used to try and push GMOs into other countries. In fact, the U.S. ambassador to France suggested that the United States create a hit list to retaliate against those players in Europe that were rejecting GMOs. Over and over again, the U.S. government has proved that their agenda is to promote biotechnology at any cost.
The GMO standards are being passed at the Codex level because, frankly, through lies, they're telling them that they're safe crops, that they're safe food products. They don't need to be labeled. We've been fighting for years to get mandatory labeling of GMO foods, and we almost succeeded. But what happened is, at the last Codex meeting in Geneva is that the U.S. tried to force this issue and actually called for a vote of this issue, and they lost. They actually lost because they wanted to use it as a bargaining chip for WTO, World Trade Organization, trade dispute to ram GMO foods down the mouths of the European Union, China, and Russia, and they lost.
NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, it basically forced corn that's largely genetically engineered into Mexico and took a couple of million farmers off the land because they couldn't compete with U.S. subsidized corn. And so the amount of millions of metric tons that was pushed into Mexico, some of it was planted, it was genetically engineered, and it is cross-pollinated with the indigenous corn varieties in Mexico, which are the source of the genetic diversity of corn in the world. So it's a treasure that has been polluted.
In India, 250,000 farmers have committed suicide because they cannot sustain input costs.
The majority of farm suicides in India are in the cotton belt. 84%, according to our study done in Vidarbha, are linked to purchase of BT cotton seeds. So we call these seeds of suicide. The poor, people, the poor small peasant, was wiped out right in the beginning because they couldn't afford these things. Shyamla's fields were once fertile, but now they bring her only sadness. Her husband Chandar owed over $5,000 in debts and was hoping for heavy rains this season. 3 days ago, she tells me, he hung himself here. Ironically, the rains came a day after he died.
The most comprehensive analysis of GMOs shows that they actually reduce yield. But sustainable technologies, they can increase yield by an average of 79%. GMOs are stealing the money away from these more appropriate technologies.
The ISTAT report proved that organic and sustainable agriculture had the same and higher yields than conventional, chemical-intensive, genetically engineered crops. These herbicides are actually having a major impact in killing the beneficial soil microorganisms in the soil. As a result of the loss of beneficial soil microorganisms, not only have the yields gone down, but there's been a dramatic increase in the rise of crop diseases, which are infecting corn and soybeans in the U.S.
For one example of many, in 2001, a small California biotech company called PepsiCo patented a product, patented a gene, which causes both men and women who eat it, in the form of any product, to produce antibodies to sperm. If the men eat the PepsiCo gene, they produce antibodies to their own sperm, rendering them irreversibly sterile. If women eat the PepsiCo gene, when they have intercourse, their bodies produce antibodies to the sperm that has been deposited and become infertile through the destruction of the sperm. Now, DuPont and Monsanto formed a joint venture, purchased the PepsiCo firm, and, quote, commercialized the PepsiCo gene. Do you want to know if the food that you're eating contains the PepsiCo gene? Sure you do. How about the food that your children are eating, or your grandchildren? Sure you do. But the FDA, the Fraud and Death Administration, has made sure that under current laws, it is illegal for you to have that information.
What do you think of that? Does it make you upset? It makes me upset. And I got 4 girls.
Yeah.
You know, well, you guys got a new grandbaby.
Yeah.
You know, it's just how far-reaching is this GMO, GE crop and food for the sake of the dollar? Money, 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 money. A monster business. How can, so, you know, Monsanto doesn't serve that food in their cafeteria. They serve organic food in their own cafeteria. How about our government? How about our presidents and the people that are running to be president? Over the past few years, an interesting pattern has emerged. While political supporters of genetically engineered foods are feasting on organics while promoting unlabeled GE foods for everyone. How about Mr. Romney, who has had ties to Monsanto going back to as late as 1970s when GE crops were still in the research and development phase. On Romney Air, on his airplane, shelves are stocked with a wide variety of healthy fare, kashi cereals, hummus, pita, as well as organic applesauce. Everything's organic, including the ingredients to Romney's favorite peanut butter and honey sandwiches. But he has ties with Monsanto. But it's what he chooses for himself. He makes it mandatory. How about even more interesting? In a 2002 article about Romney's wife, Ann, she credits a combination of organic foods and holistic medicine for turning her health around after she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 1998. She likes organic foods. How about Monsanto? They're getting money from them, a lot of money. Many political supporters of genetically engineered foods are feasting on organics. Well, they're preaching or not doing anything about unlabeled GE foods for everyone else. Romney, Obama, President George Bush, and Bill Clinton. All of them. You know, when they study what they choose or what they want in the White House for their food, it's not this food, nor is Monsanto's food in their own cafeteria. The race is neck to neck between Romney and Obama in terms of not doing anything to protect or promote safer, more healthful organic foods for the average Americans. Instead, both of them, well on organic diets themselves and for their family, promote untested GE foods for the masses. How is that even ethical? Everything that I recommend in here, it's because it's what I'm choosing for my family, because I scour information like this and do my own research, saying, okay, this is what I'm choosing right now for my family because it's what I know best. Shouldn't our leaders do the same thing? I mean, of course they should, right? Why don't they? Money. This is so unethical to me because they know the results and the outcome of what this can do, and you listen to what these people say. How can they go to bed at night knowing that they're not saying to these companies, you guys have to stop this, we need to change this around? I don't get that part. It just doesn't click in my head. In a 2008 interview, Michelle Obama is quoted as saying, you start reading the labels and you realize there's high fructose corn syrup in everything. Well, you know what the high fructose corn syrup is made from? Corn. It's 85% genetically engineered food. Everything that's in a bottle or a package is like poison in a way that most people don't even know. Of course they don't know. Because a lot of people aren't educated about food, which is fine, but they need these companies that are making food and making products to help protect them and let them have healthier lifestyles, shouldn't they? Well, the Obamas appear well informed about the health dangers of processed foods in general and genetically engineered food specifically. Their personal belief system is not filtered into the food policies that affect the rest of the population. On contrary, the president has appointed a number of former Monsanto employees into key federal positions that wield near absolute power over agricultural issues. He used to work for Monsanto, then the FDA as the head czar for food and safety, back to Monsanto, back to the FDA. I mean, is he just setting his own bed up for, trying to get everything ready? While ignoring the pre-election promise to immediately, because Obama, one of his pre-election promises was to immediately label genetically engineered food once elected into the office. What happened to that promise? Along with a lot of other promises. Yeah. But this is something that really, really, really gets me upset, because even the fact that we're trying to choose the best nutrition that we possibly can, a lot of it we don't even know because of these companies. So, the lady talked about different things with the testicles, genetically modified food. Testicles of a rat fed normal food, GM. This is a normal fed rat. This is a Monsanto GM fed rat. You can see the size. Russian National Academy of Sciences reported that more than half the babies from the mother rats fed GMO soy died within 3 weeks. The babies in the GM group are also smaller and could not reproduce. La 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 la. Europe, did you read all that list of all those countries that have said, not for us? They're not feeding it to their cattle. They're not feeding it to their people. They're not feeding it to anything because there's cattle were getting sick.
Yeah. All my friends in England,
yes,
they've talked about it for years.
For years.
And you can, overall in Europe, you can tell a difference. Pasta is different.
Right.
Everything tastes different.
Why not here? Why not us? Why not? Why, especially when our leaders are choosing it for their family and making the right choices. How come? I don't get it. Why for the masses they blind their eye? This is the rats, this is the breast. So the mammary glands of these rats fed GMO, these big nasty tumors on their breasts. Russia suspends import of American GMO corn after study revealed cancer risk. Wall Street Journal, September 25th, 2012. Just like last week. Is it on the front page? No. It shouldn't be all over the front page of the news. Do they talk? Have you heard? Do you see it on your news? Do you see it in the Des Moines Register? Do you see it on USA Today? You don't see it. Why? And here we have a bunch of food made from crops that caused insect stomachs to explode. It's safe for you, though. It's terrible. Try organic food, or as your grandparents called it, food. It's real food. So I've talked before about the foods we should choose and eliminating processed foods and breads and pastas and all these carb-rich, sugar and even dairy. We've had all these conversations. But that's just the sad part is is it going to get to a point where I can't even choose real foods for myself? I mean, it scares the heck out of me. Labeling. So here comes Proposition 37 coming up in California, November 7th, I believe is the date. It's coming up. This is a upcoming ballot initiative that would require GM foods to be properly labeled for on the shelves to tell me that it's in there. It's coming up. This is the first vote in the U.S. Monsanto has already forked over at least $4.3 million towards efforts to kill the bill. I put this slide in here like 3 weeks ago as I was preparing for this. The number's bigger now. It's almost 7 million. In the last 3 weeks. It's gone up that much. Why would Monsanto want to invest $7 million into killing the bill? Because I mean, that's a drop in the hat compared to the money that they make. Monsanto is doing everything it can to stop GMO labeling laws from being enacted in California or elsewhere in the U.S. Monsanto was actually leading the charge of promoting GMO labeling in the UK, where the company actually ran advertisements in favor of food ingredient transparency. Why? It probably had something to do with the fact that Monsanto's pro-GMO labeling ads in the UK arrived after GMO labeling laws had already been enacted across Europe. So the laws were already there. So Monsanto jumps on board and says, yeah, we're with them. We should label this stuff. We should do this. If GMOs were going to be labeled anyway, why would Monsanto not attempt to spin the situation and to make it appear as though the company not only approves it, but endorses it? Yeah, let's not do that. It's crazy. Next generation. So then how about here in the United States? Take a company like Pepsi. It's pop, right? Pepsi? Just pop? Is that all it is? No? PepsiCo is the nation's largest food company. It's not just soda. So these food companies, they go around and they buy up all these little companies. A lot of people's favorite organic brands are owned by PepsiCo. They don't know. They're the second largest in the world. They're the largest in our nation and the second largest worldwide. The Pepsi Spirit. Its annual earnings top $60 billion. It's a lot of money. This explains why the company is a top contributor among food makers. They're also to the No on 37, the Proposition 37 campaign in California. How much? $375,000 so far. PepsiCo contributed. Why would PepsiCo pony up just to keep Californians in the dark about what they're eating? It's money. PepsiCo brands span 5 divisions: Pepsi-Cola, Frito-Lay, Gatorade, Tropicana, and Quaker. And then it just trickles down from there. While most consumers probably think of processed snacks and cereal-type products when trying to avoid food containing GMOs, beverages are also a major culprit. High fructose corn syrup, right? It's huge. It's in so many things because it's cheaper than sugar, and it has a higher sweetness scale. On the scale, it's like 0 to 100, and high fructose corn syrup is like 120, whereas sugar is like 70, so it's sweeter. So it costs less, and they can use less of it, so they make more money, more profit. PepsiCo beverages sweetened with high fructose corn syrup are brands such as Pepsi and Mountain Dew, as well as Amp Energy, Lipton Iced Tea, each of which contain numerous flavors and varieties. Tropicana, juice drinks, think again, high fructose corn syrup. Then there's Naked Juice. Have you guys seen the Naked Juice?
Yeah.
You would think that it's good, right? Really? I know, a lot of things taste good, you know, it's just, but that's the problem is what's in it and what's it doing to your body. So the deal with high fructose corn syrup or corn is your gut doesn't recognize corn. I don't care if it's GE, GMO, or organic, our guts do not recognize corn, and that's the problem with the cows. The cows that are fed grain, a grain-fed cow, it goes into their gut through the stomach, and then the gut doesn't recognize it, so it passes it to the liver. And that's what creates the cow to actually be toxic. If you ask the farmer, how do you fatten the cow, what do you feed the cow? What does the farmer tell you? Grain. The reason why it fattens the cow is because it's toxic and his body stores fat because it's a safe place to push the toxicity. That's what grain does. If you want to fatten a human, what do you feed him? Grain, which is processed food. Everything that they're eating, processed foods, and high fructose corn syrup. It's your body's smart, not stupid, and it's doing everything it can to save its life, and so it stores fat. No matter if you were exercising You can't work out of a bad diet. You can't work yourself out of a bad diet. You see what I'm saying? You can't exercise yourself out of a bad diet because your body's smart and it's going to store the fat and not rid the fat if you're still putting breads, pastas, dairy, processed foods, cakes, cookies, sugar, and corn, and these things that are toxic for your body will hang on to the fat because it's saving its life. It's like when I put you out in the cold and without your mittens and your gloves in the wintertime and you lose your fingers and your toes. Smart or stupid? Smart, because your body's taking the blood and for your vital organs. It starts to prioritize things. Same thing happens with what you eat. What about Quaker? You know, steel-cut oats are good. I'm okay with that, but what about all that instant stuff? It comes from the same type products. High fructose corn syrup and GM oats. They're getting that into the stuff. Real oats are fine, but Quaker brands make heavily processed granola bars. What's in it? High fructose corn syrup and all kinds of processed stuff. And the kids and people who are not educated just because they don't have time to make the time to go and learn a lot of this stuff, right? They just knock out their stuff and family and do their careers and things like this. So they leave it up to the big food companies, but then they fancy label and pretty boxes and they write natural and organic on there, and it's all a lie. What a shame. PepsiCo's official policy regarding using GMO ingredients is rather bland. This is interesting. Approval of genetically modified foods differs from country to country regarding both use and labeling. For this reason, PepsiCo adheres to all relevant regulatory requirements regarding the use of genetically modified food crops and food ingredients within countries it operates. So, the statement points out to how the company has different standards around the world depending on what the laws are. So they just change their tune depending on where they're at, just like Monsanto did with Europe. They just changed their tune. But then Monsanto is contributing $7 million to the defeat Prop 37 in California coming up in 2 weeks. 3 weeks, whatever. 90% of American consumers say they want to know that if their food contains or doesn't contain GMOs. I mean, would you guys want to know? Of course you'd want to know. I want to know. Especially after you know some of this information. So 90% of Americans, but it'll be interesting to see if that bill goes through or gets shot down in November. If 90% of Americans are the ones voting on it, but you have these companies, I don't understand, how does it actually even work? When they've invested these millions of dollars, who does that millions of dollars go to vote that, I mean, isn't it just a democracy and a vote? I don't understand, how does the money invested in it going to change it to their favor? I mean, obviously it's through advertising as well. They're telling people, you know, like the high fructose corn syrup commercial where the gal says, I don't know what their big hang up with corn is. It's just sugar. It's just corn. They make you, because people, they don't know. It's not just corn. It's fructose. And it's not fructose like fruit. That's a different sugar. Fructose from an orange is way different than fructose from corn. Our body recognizes the orange. How did I see that? Yep, Montana would rather find. Okay, yep. Continue. Oh, cheap supply of ingredients for its highly processed, unhealthy beverages and junk food. All right, here comes another quick one. This one's quicker.
It's the most dangerous thing facing human beings in our generation.
They take genes from one species and force it into the DNA of other species. We have hundreds of millions of acres of genetically modified crops that were planted in the United States, and yet most people are not aware.
I found out that our food supply is genetically modified. And guess what? The food that my son ate on August 25th, 2009 was raw corn. The corn that almost killed him.
The process of insertion plus cloning creates massive collateral damage. There can be hundreds or thousands of mutations up and down the DNA. Things we're seeing today aren't normal. Illnesses that were epidemic before are now endemic.
We have gone from food in its whole food form to food undergoing a scientific experiment.
And having been able to cause across the entire spectrum of disease.
What the problem was is, I guess he said that they weren't able to process the food correctly, and we would load up and die from it.
And to put it on the market without telling the FDA or to consumers.
It became clear that the FDA had been lying repeatedly since 1992.
It's not just an agriculture issue, it's not just a food industry issue, it's an ever-living creature issue.
And if we don't do anything within a decade, every single major crop of any significant market size is going to be genetically modified, and we're not going to know it.
The world should go to victory. The sooner the better. Now.
We
about chemical companies selling chemicals.
What have I done to my children, and what has been done to them without my consent?
I like these little clips and these little movies, you know, because as they put their music to it and everything else, and the picture's moving fast, it just kind of slams home the emotion, you know, of what's going on. And like the gentleman said, it's not about feeding the world and about the crops; it's about the chemical companies. It all comes down to their bottom dollar and shareholders' profits, and it's just really a bad deal. The law requires labels telling us what's in our mattresses. How can anyone object to labels telling us what's in our food? You know, how simple, how common sense simple is that? Eat well. We could go on and read research after research and study after study and article after article, and we could talk about it for days. You know, so I just kind of put together this short thing because it kind of slams home the deal, and I think we all know it. And I just don't understand why it goes on. I just don't get it, especially when our government leaders choose for their families one thing, like I choose for mine, but for the masses that they're trying to help lift us up, turn their head. I just don't get that part.
They just don't care.
They just don't care. But because of the money, I just do not get that part. I couldn't go to bed at night knowing all the information about the cancers and genetic mutations and just everything else that this food, that 90, 80, 88, 94% of our food is this way already. Why wouldn't that just be because so then we have obviously healthcare reform and different things like this. Well, why are the majority of Americans sick in the first place? Because of the nutrients that they're feeding their body. Not if it was only still soy and corn was organic instead of G and GMO, because that's part of the problem, is because of even if it's organic, it's still not the right nutrients for the body that the body expects and requires when we talk about paleo diet or hunter and gatherer, whatever you want to call it. It's just a real and from the earth diet is the way I like to call it, because corn's a crop and soy's a crop. It's not a plant, you know, that was here and that just sprouted and grew from the ground like our veg, fruits, berries, nuts, seeds, and good quality wild clean protein. I don't know. This topic just drives me nuts because I don't get it. It doesn't fit in my paradigm of why, especially when I know they know. How can you know and you choose that for your family? Or Ann Romney choose it to help herself with an MS diagnosis and doing holistic different alternatives and an organic diet and change her system to a healthier place, but yet they're still not letting people know. I don't know. That's just, I wanted to get that one out because it's just something that drives me nuts. You know, the talks I've done, a lot of it is just because it's right on the front of my mind all the time. You know, obviously the first one was, it's as simple as that, which is the nervous system and how our nervous system operates and how we have to have a 100% functioning nervous system. And then it was chronic silent inflammation in our body, and that's because of processed foods and breads and pastas and dairy and all the stuff. And then my next one was about acid and alkalinity, pH. You know, because our body, if we pay attention to these things and we figure things out, our health's going to ride on the top shelf all the time. If you're missing any one of them, your health's going to suffer. You know, so then I talked about exercise and how that affects our brain and what it does for the neurotrophic factors and the neurotransmitters in our brain and why it's required by our body. It's not something we need to choose and it should be a should or a must. It's a must. You know, it has to be a must because it's a gift to our body and it helps our body stay alive. It's not about how I look or vanity. It's about your body being alive. You know, and then this GMO stuff. It's just, I don't know. It just really drives me nuts. That's
They're all riled up now.
Yeah.
They're all riled up.
Right. Thoughts? Comments?
Everybody wants cheap food.
Cheap.
And they can get cheap food this way. Yeah. If they couldn't produce 200 bushels to the acre.
They say, right. I don't know for sure because I'm not a farmer, but they say in there that it's actually producing less crop.
Mm-hmm.
I know. I don't know if I agree with that.
I don't know if I agree with that.
I don't know if I agree with that either.
Because it really does prevent, like, insect. I mean, it can prevent some things.
Of course.
And even the drought.
So they are, especially, right. And so with drought and things like that, because they said that even with our drought that we've gotten more produce out of our bushel, they were surprised.
Yes.
But look
by
at
how
the
much.
spray they put on. That's what they're growing it on. Is their
Exactly,
spray.
spray.
So you figure how much toxicity's in it now.
That's why it's so important, you guys, that we have to choose the best foods that we possibly can. And that's veg, fruit, berries, nuts, seeds, and clean protein. Everything on the inside aisle of the store is full of this stuff. Do you know what I'm saying by the inside aisles of the store? So the outside aisles, that's where our better food is. Everything you choose, guaranteed off the inside aisles of those stores, not everything, 95% of it is this. And if you're feeding yourself that, if you're feeding your kids that, it's going to make them sick.
Yeah, when my daughter lived in Italy and she was eating pasta and breads and everything, didn't gain any weight, came back and thought she could do the same thing, was getting the same amount of exercise and started gaining weight. And there they don't have any GMO. They refuse to have it.
That's right.
In Italy and England,
but it also has a lot to do with the way that they make that bread. I don't know.
Yes, they make the bread. Yes.
Yeah. And so instead of the high fructose corn syrup as well.
Right.
But then also, again, I'm not a bread maker, but like with the yeast and different,
they do it somehow different.
It's different.
Yeah.
Then obviously a loaf of bread off the shelf at my Dolls and my Hy-Vee, it's different.
Yeah.
And even I think the stuff in the bakery.
It tastes better too.
Yeah. So it's just a sore subject. I don't know how they would change it. How they would get things to go a different direction. Because it's a big deal. Obviously, if 80 to 94% of our crop's already that way, that's how do you shift it?
Well, I think they just keep letting it go to the point where it's just so big of a monster now, it's almost impossible to go backwards.
Well, and like they said, they've ruined the soil.
And they've ruined the what she's saying is they took it to Mexico. They've actually ruined the seeds.
Mm-hmm.
Where the Mother Nature seeds are, they've ruined so much, but there's not enough seeds that could replenish our soil. Should there be?
No,
because before they used to have
seeds.
Right, start all over again. But also how that's affecting our people that choose organically grown and how they're organically farming, how it's affecting their stuff. Plus the laws that are getting them so they can't abide by the safety issue things. Oh, man.
That's probably political suicide too.
Yeah.
You get your senators, your presidents, everybody. That's how they get their votes.
Right, of course.
If the price of food doubles, they're going to lose votes.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's just a sad system. It's a terrible.
And it all has to do with trade too.
It does.
It's all with trade with other countries. It's all interconnected.
It's a big deal. Mm-hmm. Wow. So that's all we can do. All we can do is choose the best that we can for us and our families.
And grow our own.
And grow our own and be educated and know our...
A lot of people are heading that way.
Yeah,
grow own gardens.
Yeah, and our co-ops and stuff like that. Even your Whole Foods, you guys, the outside aisles is the places you can shop. The inside aisles, there are products from PepsiCo, PepsiCo company in Whole Foods. So it was funny because I went there the first weekend they were open, and it's a beautiful store, and their produce is gorgeous. When I buy produce there, and their meat market is amazing and awesome and gorgeous. And just that one aisle on the left side of the store, that aisle is amazing. All the other aisles, same stuff. Yeah. But I see people going through with their grocery carts and they're getting their chips and their crackers and stuff, and they think that they're doing better by shopping at that store because there's fancy labels on it and it's in a store called Whole Foods, and they feel better about it, but they're still eating the same thing, which is majority of processed foods, instead of foods that are live and full of enzymes and full of micronutrition, which are enzymes and phytonutrients and phytochemicals and vitamins and minerals and all the stuff that our body needs. Not macronutrition, which is protein, carbs, and fats. That's what the government will think about when they're talking about your plate and proteins, carbs, and fats and things like this. It's the micronutrition. You have to have your food alive, not processed. What else? That's it. That's my deal. So choose well.
What do you think of the Atkins diet?
It's no good.
No?
No, because you have to have your veg and fruits.
Yeah.
So, and plus it doesn't state that, see, your protein and fat is awesome, but it has to come from grass-fed, antibiotic, hormone-free, or wild caught. Our hunter and gatherer ancestors, a lot of them didn't have a copious amount of fruits and vegetables. Like somebody that lived in Iceland, they meat and blubber. That's all they, they eat the seal. Fat and blubber, fat and blubber, fat and blubber. And that's very healthy for us from a wild source. So if someone just thinks about an Atkins diet and they're going to eat protein and fat and a very limited amount of any greens or anything else, they're eating it from grain-fed, industrialized, antibiotic, hormone-free, and that's omega-6 toxic. And when we take those omega-6s into us, that makes our ratio imbalanced in our body. So the hunter and gatherer's ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s was 2 to 1. Most Americans today are 10 to 1 to 40 to 1 omega-6s to omega-3s. That makes the body inflamed. When the body's inflamed, it's hot, and it causes a metabolic derangement within the body. It stores fat. It screws up the insulin, and it stores fat. And it creates all the chronic disease. We're the sickest we've been as a species ever in the life of our existence. Chronic disease from your number one ones that you think about, which would be cholesterol, high blood pressure, and diabetes. And all that is chronic disease from an omega-6 inflamed toxic.
Kids are getting
it's not type 2 diabetes anymore.
Yeah.
Or it's not adult onset diabetes anymore. They've changed the name to type 2 because they're eating this toxic diet. And that's the result. That's the effects. The cause is the nutrition. The effect is these conditions that are treated with medications. Because most, not all, most medical doctors don't know anything about nutrition. They really don't. They'll tell them, oh, you got to watch your diet. Or I've even had patients come in and they'll tell me, I was diagnosed with, diabetes or high blood pressure. And I say, so what'd they tell you? Well, they put me on these medications. I said, did they talk to you at all about their diet? And they'll say, well, I asked them about the diet, and they said, the diet's not going to work. Yeah. It's not going to work because they don't know the right thing to tell them.
Yeah.
On how to change their nutrition.
Yeah, look at all those people that lose 100 pounds because they start eating well, and their blood pressure, they don't have to take their pills anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or the diabetes shots.
Yep. And so it all comes down to you're each and every one of our individual choices, because it's me that decides what I eat. It's me that decides the majority of what my children eat. When they're away from me, they have to decide. That's why I have to teach them well. So it all comes down to your choices. And you can try to justify and rationalize different things, but your body doesn't care about your justifications, your rationalizations. It's going to respond to what you're putting in it. So you got to put amazing food in your body so your body can thrive. That's the deal, Lucille.